But first, let's talk about Myanmar's leader, Aung San Suu Kyi. She's been addressing the International Court of Justice in The Hague. She was there to reject accusations of genocide against Rohingya Muslims in her country. The BBC's Asia editor, Rebecca Henschke, is live with us from The Hague in the Netherlands, where that case is being heard. Hi, Rebecca. Good to have you with us. Before we hear some of what's been said, just remind us who Aung San Suu Kyi is and, of course, why she's there.
Well, Aung San Suu Kyi is here at the court representing Myanmar, effectively defending her country in this case that's been brought by Gambia, accusing the country of carrying out genocide against the minority Rohingya Muslim population inside the country. Now, Aung San Suu Kyi may be a familiar name to many people listening. She's a Nobel Peace Laureate. She was under house arrest for decades, under the very military that she's now defending. And she was hailed by many people around the world as a democracy icon, fighting for democracy in Burma.
And that's all obviously an image that many feel is now being challenged by her defence here and her comments that she's made at The Hague. Let's take a listen to some of the statements that she has made in court today. And with your help, we're going to try and fact-check them as well. First, she claimed that the violence in August 2017 was provoked by militants launching a major offensive.
More than 30 police stations and villages and one military base had been attacked before sunrise in a highly coordinated fashion by an organized armed group operating along a densely forested hill range that provides ample opportunity for hiding. Many of the ARSA fighters had been recruited from local villages in the weeks and months preceding the attack. Myanmar's defense services responded to the attacks of ARSA fighters by the use of ground forces.
First of all, Rebecca, what do we mean when we say ARSA?
ARSA is the Arakan Rohingya Salvation Army. It's a militant group that was created fairly recently in the Rakhine state. They say that their role is to defend the Rohingya population from attacks against the military, and they want greater autonomy and greater control of that region of Myanmar.
And in the clip that we just heard, Rebecca, Aung San Suu Kyi makes reference to the defence services responding to the attacks of ARSA back in August 2017. Does this match what we know about what happened back then?
Well, it is correct what she describes as happening, that there were attacks on police stations. They were coordinated, and they were surprising in their level of sophistication. But what happened after that is where the truth differs from what Aung San Suu Kyi painted a picture of today in the court, because what we do know from a UN fact-finding mission that investigated those events, they have said that in response to these attacks, the military carried out gross human rights violations to the level where they believe the military members should be investigated for genocide. They said that they went into Rohingya villages and routinely and systematically employed rape, gang rape, and other violent actions against women, young children, and they burnt houses, often with people locked inside, places of worship. So what Aung San Suu Kyi was today saying was a routine counter-insurgent operation in response to this security threat that they're facing from Assad is one side of the story. From the other side, from UN fact-finding mission, is that the military's response was completely disproportionate to a level where it carried out acts of grave human rights violations.
And she also blamed the mass displacement of Rohingya Muslims on militants fighting for independence. And this is how she described what is happening on the ground.
Rakhine today suffers an internal armed conflict between the Buddhist Arakan army and Myanmar's defense services. Muslims are not a party to this conflict, but may, like other civilians in the conflict area, be affected by security measures that are in place. We pray the court to refrain from taking any action that might aggravate the ongoing conflict and armed conflict and peace and security in Rakhine.
Rebecca, listening to that, would you consider that a fair description?
It's definitely downplaying the situation, and I think that's a fair assessment. We're talking about 700,000 people fleeing across the border out of a population of 1 million Rohingyas that were in the country. So a huge exodus from an area at the same time that we've seen through satellite images whole villages grazed to the ground, burnt to dust. And then we have had BBC journalists go into those areas and see that villages for the Buddhist community are built in the very same place that once had Rohingya villages. I've just been speaking with one of those refugees who fled to the Cox's Bazar. She's travelled here to The Hague. She was sitting in court today listening to Aung San Suu Kyi, and she said she was filled with a sense of rage. She said to me that she felt like leaping up and shouting at her, that she felt like she wasn't telling the truth. This woman had lost 10 members of her family, she said, her husband, her brother, and other close family members. She said she saw them killed in front of her own eyes, and she came here to hear what she hoped was the truth, and in her version, the truth wasn't told by Aung San Suu Kyi today in the court.
And of course, the young lady you mentioned has made her way there to hear Aung San Suu Kyi's account, but over at the refugee camp in Cox's Bazar in Bangladesh, refugees there have been shouting liar, liar and shame from the reports that I've been reading as well. Rebecca, the next clip that I want to play you looks at action going forward. Ms Suu Kyi told the judges that Myanmar's justice system was capable of punishing any infringements of the law, and the International Court of Justice should not intervene.
If war crimes have been committed by members of Myanmar's defense services, they will be prosecuted through our military justice system in accordance with Myanmar's constitution. It is a matter for the competent criminal justice authorities to assess whether, for example, there had been inadequate distinction between civilians and RSF fighters, disproportionate use of force, violations of human rights, failure to prevent plundering of property or destruction, or acts of forcible displacement of civilians. Such conduct, if proven, could be relevant under international humanitarian law or human rights conventions, but not under the 1948 Genocide Convention.
Rebecca, do we have any evidence so far that Myanmar is willing to punish members of its own military for what happened in the Rakhine state?
Well, late last night, they did begin a rare court-martial of soldiers following a probe into alleged atrocities during the crackdown on Rohingya Muslims. There was a case where very few people have been brought to punishment, but we had 7 soldiers jailed for 10 years for killing 10 Rohingya men and boys. People might remember this is a case that was revealed by 2 Reuters journalists. But these soldiers were granted early release last November after serving less than a year in prison. The 2 journalists, the Burmese journalists who helped uncover those murders, they spent more time in jail than the actual soldiers who were found guilty of those murders.
Rebecca Henschke, our Asia editor there at The Hague for us. Good to get your insights and expertise.